Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed. Lab-proven to work fast. And proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
Your kids could get free or low-cost health coverage from Medicaid or CHIP. Even if you've applied before, they may be eligible now. Kids up to age 19 are covered for checkups, vaccines, dentist visits, hospital care, and more. And if they already have Medicaid or CHIP, remember to renew every year. Visit insurekidsnow.gov or call 877-KIDS-NOW. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
In May of 1983, a young couple is parked in a scenic spot near the Loch Raven Reservoir in Baltimore County, Maryland. Without warning, they are ambushed with shots being fired into the car, and the couple is seriously wounded. This would mark the second double shooting at a lover's lane in the area in just 4 weeks' time. While the first couple survived and recovered from their injuries, this second shooting took the life of a 22-year-old woman. The violence set forth fears of a potential serial killer in the area, but just as the shooting started, they stopped. Over 40 years have passed, but police haven't given up hope that they can find this cold-blooded killer. I'm your host, Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Cathy Britt. Just as a content warning, in a couple of minutes, I'll be discussing a death by suicide, and I know that can be triggering to some listeners, so please take care when listening. What do you think of when you hear of lovers' lanes? I personally think of the Zodiac Killer because of the way he targeted these locations. I also think of how obsolete they are now, and what a place of vulnerability they were in terms of people's safety. Lovers' lanes once held a special place in American dating culture. These tucked away spots, whether a wood clearing, a quiet road on the edge of town, or a scenic overlook, were some of the only places young couples could be alone together. At a time when many people lived at home until marriage, privacy was hard to come by, and a parked car became its own little world. But as the decades rolled on, their popularity began to fade. More adults gained access to apartments and dorm rooms or other private spaces, and dating itself shifted away from the rituals of cruising and parking. Lovers' lanes also developed a darker reputation. While they were meant for stolen kisses and whispered promises, they too often became backdrops for danger. Crimes at these locations, sometimes sensationalized in headlines, sometimes whispered about in urban legends, and later cemented in horror films, created an association with risk and vulnerability that never really left. At the same time, the world around them changed too. Once secluded roads were paved, lit, and developed into neighborhoods or shopping centers. Even in rural areas, patrols, surveillance cameras, and neighborhood watch groups make it harder to find that sense of secret seclusion. Today, lovers' lanes are more of a nostalgic image than a lived reality. Modern couples have more choices. They have late-night coffee shops and streaming movies in someone's apartment, or even sharing intimacy over a FaceTime call. Privacy hasn't disappeared, it's just moved indoors or online. What remains of lovers' lanes is their cultural memory, part romantic, part ominous, a reminder of a time when young love had to make do with the glow of a dashboard light and the hum of an idling engine. One such couple was a 22-year-old woman named Catherine who went by Cathy, Britt, and her boyfriend. Now, he is listed in early newspaper articles with his full name, but I've noticed he's not listed in some of the more recent case coverage, and because I don't know if he just wants to have some peace and distance from this traumatic event, I'm going to operate cautiously and just refer to him by his first name, James. It was May 14th, 1983, and Cathy and James had a fun evening together. They had gone out to the restaurant Steak and Ale, which was a popular chain restaurant into the early 2000s. Then they went out to see a movie. Dinner and a movie, the classic date night. After the movie ended, they went back to Cathy's place that she shared with her sister. James said that she had gotten dressed up for their date night and she wanted to get changed into something more comfortable, and they watched the Baltimore Orioles game together. They were playing the Texas Rangers and the Orioles lost 2-1. To keep the evening going just a bit longer, they decided to hop into James's car, an AMC Spirit, which I had to look up because I was unfamiliar with them, and it makes sense because they were only made for a handful of years, from 1979 to 1983. They were a sporty little two-door car. It was described in one article as AMC's answer to a Chevette or a Pinto. The two headed out to the Loch Raven watershed area. Loch Raven Park surrounds the Loch Raven Reservoir in Baltimore County, Maryland. It's a beautiful natural area that serves both as a protected drinking water supply and a popular outdoor recreation spot. Its forested hills, scenic shoreline, and extensive trail network make it a favorite for hikers, also bird watchers, fishers, and people who like to boat. And because of its seclusion, it was a popular spot for young couples to pull off in their cars on romantic date nights. Cathy and James pulled off to the side of Poplar Hill Road on the northern side of the reservoir. They were there for about an hour when they noticed a car speed by them going very fast. They didn't think much of it after that, and they didn't see it return. They were thinking of wrapping up their evening and leaving as it was getting late. It was around 2 a.m. Suddenly, out of the pitch black area, the couple saw the light of a gun on the passenger side window, and the window just blast open. The gunman fired multiple shots, striking both Cathy and James. 6 shots total, and all of them hit. The gunman then walked up to the driver's side door and demanded James's wallet, which he immediately turned over. It only had $10 in it. Despite being seriously wounded with shots striking him in his head, chest, and arm, James gunned it out of there. James admitted later that he isn't great with directions, and back then you couldn't just plug an address into your car's GPS. So he had to try to find his way in the dark, and he didn't know how to get to the hospital, so he headed in the direction that he did know, Cathy's apartment. Cathy had been shot at least twice in the head and was slumped over. James kept talking to Cathy for the entirety of the 5-mile drive. He kept saying he was so sorry that it was so cold because of the wind blowing through the open window, telling her he was trying to get back as fast as he could, which wasn't super fast because he had been shot in the chest and had 2 collapsed lungs, which made it too painful for him to shift out of second gear. James made it back to the apartment and began pushing all the buzzer buttons to try to get anybody to open their door and help. He then collapsed on the floor of the hallway. Just as he thought nobody was going to help, a good Samaritan opened his door. The neighbor, a man named Steve Sherman, found the bleeding man and stayed with him and Cathy while also calling for an ambulance and police. There, in the early morning hours, the pair were rushed via Maryland State Police helicopter to the University of Maryland Hospital's shock trauma unit. Because one of the bullets grazed James's head, they weren't able to give him any pain medication, and once the adrenaline wore off from getting help, he recalled being in a ton of pain. His condition was very serious, but Cathy's was grave. She slipped into a coma, and doctors worked incredibly hard to save her. For a couple of days, Cathy clung to life, and the neuro team tried everything. The family would go on to later thank the doctors and the neurology team for everything they did to try to save their daughter. But it became clear that Cathy was not going to survive her extensive injuries. 2 days after the shooting, Cathy was taken off life support, and a couple of days after that, on May 19th, Cathy passed away. Cathy's family honored her wishes, and she was able to donate organs to both research and those who were in need. Cathy and James were high school sweethearts, and they had been dating for about 6 years. James was a year ahead of Cathy in school. They both shared a huge love of athletics and fitness. After graduating, James attended Hartford Community College for a couple of years before transferring over to Towson State University and earning a degree in sports management. Upon his graduation, he became the fitness director at a local fitness club that he had worked part-time at for a few years. Cathy Britt also attended Towson State University and was due to graduate with her bachelor's degree in geography and economics the Sunday after her death. Cathy loved running, and her and James were set to do a race that weekend. She also loved racquetball, and she played that at Towson State. She was described as fun-loving and kind. The couple had no enemies, and the shooting appeared to be totally random. But authorities knew this was bigger than just a random one-time event, because it eerily mirrored a similar attack just 4 weeks earlier, almost to the day. Just a month earlier, in April of 1983, an engaged couple named Jill and Ronald were hanging out in their car at the Loch Raven watershed. They were about 2.5 miles away from the area that James and Cathy were shot, but still in the northern end of the park. Jill and Ronald were set to marry soon, but they were still living in their respective families' homes, so they were out on this night to have some privacy and alone time. They had parked in the old North Central Railroad right-of-way on Phoenix Road. It was around 2 a.m. when suddenly, out of the pitch black, Ronald's driver's side door was ripped open. This instantly turned on the dome light in the vehicle, but before Jill and Ronald could see who was there or even collect themselves to figure out what was going on, a gunman blasted multiple shots at both of them. The gunman never uttered a single word. Ronald had been shot in the arm and it had shattered the bone, but he managed to turn the car on and drive away. He began speeding, seeing his fiancée horrifically wounded with gunshots to the head and chest. His speeding caught the eye of a patrol officer who pulled him over for speeding and then promptly radioed for help for the injured couple. Ronald made a quick recovery, and miraculously, Jill survived her injuries as well, though she spent nearly a month in the hospital and had a very long recovery. Jill and Ronald didn't get a good look at the suspect at all, and Jill actually couldn't even remember the incident. Now, this made the paper, and I did find several articles about it, but according to James, he said there was a relatively low level of publicity on this. In fact, he hadn't even read about this shooting. He said had he known the danger, he and Cathy wouldn't have gone there that night. Nowadays, we have the 24-hour news cycle and social media where if a couple got shot in the way that Jill and Ronald did, there would be likely both citizens doing posts on, say, Facebook and police posting warnings as well. Police wanted to get the word out more, so they stepped up patrols in the area. They already actually had after the first time around, but this time they did even more so. They ordered 20 signs to go around the park that said, "No parking, dusk until dawn." They began warning couples, they say, as they stepped up their patrols. And they were sending officers into local high schools, warning students not to park in the watershed area and to avoid lovers' lanes altogether. But to the officers' immense frustration, they continued to find couples parked there, ignoring the warnings. Police could not definitively say that the cases were connected, but they implied it heavily and later would go on to say that they believed they were. At the time, they were waiting for ballistics testing to confirm. But in real time, they were able to say that both attacks had the following overlaps. One, in both instances, the attacks occurred in the same area around 2 a.m. Both shootings involved a .25 caliber automatic pistol. In both attacks, the shooter said nothing before opening fire. Neither man recalled hearing a car start up, so it seems as though the perpetrator left on foot. In both cases, the women were shot in a much more serious way. Both men were shot, but the women were shot in the head, and the men were able to drive off and get help. Both shootings occurred on very dark, rainy, moonless nights. In terms of the differences, the second attack had a robbery aspect where the shooter spoke and demanded that James give him his wallet. Also, in the first attack, the shooter approached the driver's side door and opened it, whereas in the second attack, he shot through the passenger side window. While both were on weekend days, the first shooting occurred early on a Saturday morning, and the second occurred early on a Sunday morning. The rain kept up for several days after James and Cathy's attack, which got in the way of investigators looking for clues around the crime scene. When the rain did let up, police searched the area for physical evidence, but remained quiet about anything they found, in part because they weren't sure what would prove to be significant later. They scoured the woods and even found a man living in a tent in the woods. Because the suspect seemingly fled on foot, he was very much worth looking into. But from all the reports I can tell, it sounds like they do not believe he was involved in the shootings. Police were concerned that the timelines of these shootings were ritualistic in nature, and so they began staking out certain days and weekends that they thought the killer might strike again. They actually set up a decoy car. They put a sporty car with 2 mannequins in it pulled off to the side of the road, and police waited in the woods to try to lure out the suspect and get an arrest. But they didn't trick the unknown shooter. Instead, a group of 3 men were walking in the area after a night of drinking and approached the car to warn the couple not to park there for their own safety because of the recent shootings. So you can imagine their surprise when they realized the couple were mannequins and suddenly they were surrounded by officers telling them to put their hands up. It was interesting. Just as fast as the shootings had started and the fear was instilled in the community, suddenly they stopped. And a few weeks after the second shooting, a rumor began to emerge as to why that may be. In June of 1983, police announced that they were working to investigate a connection between the shooter and a man who had recently died by suicide. a Bel Air high school graduate, had taken his own life only hours after allegedly speaking to his attorney and a priest about the murder. Now, I don't know how they know about the priest part because priests have a real code of silence on these things, but perhaps he told his lawyer that he told the priest. They wouldn't go as far as saying that he confessed to the murders, so I'm not exactly sure what was said. As promising as this seems, especially how it would explain away the lack of continued shootings, police came forward to say that this person was virtually eliminated, and they were 95% sure he wasn't connected. One high-ranking official even told reporters that his talks of involvement were a hoax, which that is some extreme dedication to a hoax. But it does sound like this man had some mental health issues, and if you are a true crime listener, this would not be the first time you've ever heard of someone struggling with mental health confessing to a crime they didn't commit. Maybe one of the things ruling this man out was his appearance, because I haven't told you this yet, but James did get a look at the shooter. A composite sketch was made, but it was never confirmed who contributed to that. Was it James? Was it Richard? Was it both? Remember, the shooter took James's wallet, which likely had his ID and address in it, so maybe police were just being cautious about naming him as the source of the sketch for his safety. I'll have the composite sketch on my Instagram at simplertimecrimepod. The suspect was described as 22 to 32 years old, about 5'6" to 5'7", with a slender build, and was about 135 to 145 pounds. He also had stringy brown hair and may have had a small mustache, and I say that to say it was thinner and not one of those like big bushy mustaches. Once the composite sketch was released, 200 calls came in about who it could be. And I will say, like many composite sketches, it did have a rather generic look to it. One of the modern-day detectives working on the case did say it looked like a lot of people at the time. He just had a general appearance of what people looked like in the 80s. One thing I thought was cool was that police age progressed the composite sketch over the years, which I've heard of people doing with missing persons posters, but I haven't seen a lot of it done on the perpetrator side. And it makes sense to do so. Someone isn't going to look the same 20 years later. I imagine, though, it must be tricky because you aren't working off of a photograph like you are in a missing persons case. You're working off a person's memory of an encounter with someone, which is already going to be a bit more generic. Police did develop a bit of a profile of their suspected shooter. They said that the person was likely local and knew the watershed area well and could get around easily undetected. They believed the killer had a hatred towards women and possibly targeted couples because of his own inability to secure a relationship. A real old-school incel, if you will. They also believed that the killer enjoyed the stalking aspect of the crimes as much, if not more, than the killings themselves. Waiting out in the woods, watching the couples kissing and whatnot, knowing he was going to strike. Years passed with no other attacks, but also no more progress in the case. In 1991, the Evening Sun out of Baltimore did a piece on the unsolved attacks at the watershed area. And in it, reporter Mike Klingeman interviewed Detective Ken Ziegler. The pair met up at the site of the Cathy Britt murder. Mike Klingeman described the woods along Poplar Hill Road as lovely, dark and deep, the workshop of poets and painters. Detective Ziegler, on the other hand, had a different opinion. He said they gave him the creeps, and he told Mike, quote, "It feels real cold and impersonal up here. I really love the outdoors, and I like to walk in the woods, but I can't relax up here because I know what happened." Detective Ziegler gave updates on some of the work they had been doing on the case, like anniversary stakeouts, and those, again, failed to trap the killer. He talked about how early on they investigated and background checked every worker at the theater and restaurant that James and Cathy went to that night. In the event that the killer followed them that evening, they looked for any old flames who may have a grudge or jealousy, but that also came up empty. They never recovered the weapon, and the gun was never connected to any other homicides. He said if they could figure out why the killing stopped, they could probably find out who did it. He said he was so frustrated because they would find a suspect who had a lot of guns, but then the person wouldn't own a .25 caliber gun. Or they find someone who they think is a good suspect, only to find out that he was in jail at the time. Detective Ziegler said in the years following the shootings, they had followed up on 400 leads and had 10 suspects, 2 who were new to the case in the last month or so as of 1991. Detective Ziegler believed that the man was either locked up in some sort of mental institution or prison, that he had died, or that he had moved away. And remember that guy who died by suicide? Well, Ziegler went on to say that actually another person had committed suicide around that same time, and that person had also confessed to the crimes. The first person, as I mentioned, they were pretty much ruled out. But this second person, they aren't so sure. He lived close to the watershed area and frequented it. He matched the physical description of the killer, and he had emotional problems. But the family was not cooperative after his death and denied his involvement in the crime. This person who had died by suicide had allegedly confessed to a confidential source before he had died. James continued to look at suspect pictures but never identified anyone out of a photo lineup. Some detectives who worked the case believed he found a romantic partner in his life that allowed him to table some of his rage towards women, and that's why the shooting stopped. Detective Ziegler seemed to lean more into thinking that the suspect was deceased. One thing that popped into my head during the research, besides that whole Zodiac killer piece, who he would definitely not match the suspect description, was the Colonial Parkway murders and the Colonial Parkway serial killer. The Colonial Parkway murders, they're a series of homicides that occurred between 1986 and 1989 along or near the Colonial Parkway, which is a scenic highway in Virginia that runs between Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. In those cases, the victims were young couples, often parked in secluded or semi-rural areas. Several crime scenes involved cars left behind in strange conditions. There were similarities suggesting law enforcement knowledge, such as how the vehicles were staged, leading to speculation that the killer may have impersonated an officer. No clear motive of robbery or sexual assault emerged in most of the cases. Just last year, in 2024, a suspect was tied to some of the cases via DNA evidence. A fisherman named Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. died in 2017, so he can't be charged or further investigated. The main similarity to me was just the idea that he was targeting young couples along this highway. And I did that thing that I was just talking about in an earlier episode about not doing. I put the composite sketch of the suspect in Maryland next to a photo of Wilmer, and I did see similarities. The Colonial Parkway killings occurred just a few years after the Maryland ones and would explain the stopping of the Maryland ones. But you'll recall they believe that the Maryland shooter was local, and from what I could find, it looks like Wilmer was born and died in Lancaster County, Virginia. The Loch Raven watershed shootings continue to haunt the area as a killer has never been apprehended and never struck again in the area, at least not in the same way. Police back early in the investigation had asked the public to come forward with certain things, and I think it still applies today. They said if they noticed anyone acting differently or abruptly leaving town or changing their appearance right after the murder, if they were acting nervous or preoccupied or closely following the story, or on the flip side, really distancing themselves from the story. Did the person shave their mustache off? Anything like that could be connected. police do ask if you were in the area in 1983 and you saw something, no matter how small you think it is, please contact the Baltimore County Police at 410-887-3943. There is still a $2,000 reward for information. While some people connected to the families have passed away, there are still many people who want to know who this killer was. Some sources dubbed this elusive killer the Forest Phantom, but to me, he doesn't deserve some hyped-up nickname. He wasn't mysterious. He was a coward who brutally gunned down 4 defenseless people in the dark, taking the life of one of them and forever changing the other 3. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please follow the podcast on your preferred listening platforms and leave a 5-star review. If you are able to support the show financially, I now have a Spreaker Supporters Club link at the bottom of the show notes. This is not expected, but much appreciated, as every little bit helps me to further the work I'm doing. Case suggestions can be made to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. I'm also on other social media platforms, but I'm mostly active on Instagram. I love connecting with listeners in that way, so please feel free to comment, DM. I'm always up to chat. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again next Monday.